Hello, welcome to this class. This is EDF 819. EDF 819, Comparative Study of National School System. I repeat, the course title is EDF 819. The course title is Comparative Study of National School Systems. This is a program being brought to you as Masters of Education students. Yesterday, we looked at the course we looked at the purpose of the course. We also looked at the learning outcomes of the course. We looked at the course content. We talked about the teaching methodology. We looked at the instructional material and equipment. We looked at the course assessment, and that is what we looked at yesterday. Uh, and I hope you are available today for today's lesson. I introduced a course yesterday, and this course, the course of our learning, I remember having said that today we are going to carry on with learner centeredness. Learner centeredness. What are we going to look at? We are going to look at learner centeredness. What do I mean by learner centered pedagogy? What do I mean by learner centered pedagogy? Now, learner centered pedagogy follows a constructivist approach. Learner centered pedagogy follows a constructivist approach. Thus, it places students or learners at the center of the teaching or learning process. We're saying that learner centered pedagogy places learners or students at the center of the teaching or learning process. Students are more active and participative, and the process turns knowledge into a negotiation between students and teachers. We're saying that in this learner centered approach, students are more active and participative as compared to teacher centered approach. And the process turns knowledge into a negotiation between teachers and students. Students are active participants in this learner centered approach. Teachers do not just walk to class with the knowledge to pump into students. Rather, they come to class and they engage learners into negotiations. They have to negotiate. So, in this approach, learners and teachers are negotiators. The same way you will go to Gikomba Market or you'll go to West in Eldoret here and you want to buy a Mutumba cloth, you will have to negotiate with the seller. So it will be the business of the seller and the buyer to negotiate. Here, when we are talking about learner-centered approach, this negotiation will be between the teachers and the students. In learner-centered approach or learner-centered pedagogy, the role of the teacher is more that of a coach than a person with all the answers. The teacher The way I told you, the teacher cannot pretend to be to be all knowing. The teacher doesn't have all answers that the student needs. No. In this approach, it is taken that the teacher has some information and learners also have information. So the teacher will have to organize the resources to enable the learners to organize materials or to come up with materials. So the focus is on both the instructor and the students. When we are talking about learner-centered pedagogy, the focus is not only on the teacher, but on both the teacher and the students. Learning occurs through the process of interaction between the instructor and students, and also among the students alone. What am I saying? That in learner centered pedagogy, we have two types of interaction. The first type of interaction is that one between the teacher and the students. And the second type of instruction or interaction is that one that will take place among the students themselves. This class is meant for masters of education, masters of education, and that is exactly what we are doing. It is not meant for undergraduate, neither is it meant for any other level, but it is meant for master in education. The students who are doing comparative education. And I've said that it is EDF 819. EDF 819. Now, there are, I want to give you 7 student-centered learning examples with technology. 7 examples of student-centered learning with the technology. Now, the first one is you make presentations interactive. The presentations in class, whether by the teacher or by the students, are supposed to be interactive. You don't have a situation whereby the teacher will stand before the students and communicate. This communication cannot be one sided, but or rather will be two-sided. So you interact, it is interaction between the teacher and the learners, or the interaction among the learners themselves. That is the first one. So the presentations are supposed to be made interactive. The second one, we're supposed to assess students' understanding in real time or personalized instruction. I want you to understand that whatever we are talking about relate very closely with competence-based curriculum. I know all of you or some of you may not have had any training in competence-based curriculum, but this course is providing you with the best opportunity to learn something about competence-based curriculum. That you, as an instructor, when you go to class, you assess your students real time. Remember, if you are going to class to teach division, maybe a division in mathematics, and you want to teach a certain concept, let me take a very simple one. For example, a division of two-digit number with three-digit number. So three-digit number by two-digit number. The moment you give that sum or that operation to your learners, any learner who gets that concept, you are supposed to assess it and mark it in an assessment book. You record whatever you see in real time. I know you understand what I mean by real time, there and there. And once the learner is having challenges in mastering that concept, you again record it in real time. That is CBC. And that is why when I was talking about uh, challenges facing this type of learning, I said that if you are having 70 learners in your class, then assessing them in real time may pose a challenge to you. So we are saying that second step, you as an instructor have to assess the student's understanding of each and every step in your teaching in real time. You also have to personalize instruction. You don't just have to look at learners. If you have 40 learners, and the moment 30 learners have understood, you say that the objective of the lesson was achieved. No, you this lesson is supposed to be taken to a specific learner, an individual learner. When you go to that class of 40, you see a learner individually. You don't see them as a class. You see each learner individually. And that is why the instruction has to be personalized. You don't just have to give us an assessment of the whole class, but you assess each learner individually and you assess that learner in real time. That is the second step in assessment, or the second step in student learner assessment, or student centered learning with the technology. So we can look at the third step. This one is to empower students with choice and control. You empower students with choice and control. That is very important. You have to empower them with choice control. I have a problem with my lights. They have gone off, but still, we shall continue. I have a backup power with me. So we are saying that another step, that is the fourth step, you have to encourage classroom collaboration so that you encourage your learners not to work individually, but you encourage them to work in groups. They can be small groups or larger groups. You also have to use educational games. This is the fifth one. Educational games to make your learning interactive and enjoyable. You don't just go to class and pump knowledge into learners, but encourage them to have to make your education or the instructional to make your instruction to use games as you over that instruction. You know, I've had a problem with the power, but I thank God it has come back. So this is what I'm saying. So when you are teaching about vocabulary, well, let's say that you are teaching about vocabulary and from 2 or from 3, and you are teaching your learners about vocabulary, then you can give them something like word puzzle, something like word puzzle. That is a game that can assist them, although it is a game, but it can assist them to learn new vocabulary. So the sixth example of learner centered with the technology. This is student voice activities. You allow your learners to voice or to have some activities whereby students will give out or will voice whatever they have. For example, you can give them presentations in class so that a learner can stand before others and make presentation. That is an example of student voice activities. They can also engage in debates. If they engage in debates, that is an activity that involves voice. So the last step or last example of student-centered learning, we can talk about teach social emotional learning skills. Social emotional learning skills. So that is the last step in the 7 student learner centered examples with the technology. Now, let us look at the characteristics of learner centered teaching. Learner centered teaching. As I told you last time, when you people go out, we now expect you at all levels, be it ECD, primary school level, high school level, or if you will have a chance to teach CBC students at the university level, then learner-centered teaching is always encouraged. Learner-centered teaching is encouraged. So let me give you the characteristics of learner-centered teaching. Now, these characteristics are going to be based on Mary Ellen Weimar. There is a scholar called Mary Ellen Weimar. Let me spell this name, Mary Ellen. Maryellen. That is Mary Ellen. Weimar, I want to spell Weimar. That is Weimar. That is Mary Ellen Weimar. So Mary Ellen Weimar gave us 5 characteristics of learner-centered teaching. Mary Ellen Weimar gave us 5 characteristics of learner-centered teaching. And these are the ones that I'm going to give you. 1, directly engaging students in hard and messy work. You engage students or your learners in hard and messy work of learning. 2, I'll say that first of all, you engage your learners or your students in hard work. The second one, you engage them in messy work of learning. Thirdly, you provide explicit instruction. You provide explicit skill instruction. So, the skill that you want your learners to learn, you provide it to them. Fourthly, you encourage your students to reflect on what they are learning and how they are learning. They have to reflect on whatever they are learning and how they are learning. How are they learning? Are they learning through discussion? Are they learning through problem solving approach? Are they learning in the form of debating? So, what are they learning and how are they learning? And lastly, according to Mary Ellen Weimar, you have to motivate your students by giving them mm, some appraisal, such as well done, good, good attempt. So that is another way of, or another characteristic of learner-centered learning as given by Mary Ellen Weimar. My dear students, remember this is masters. I'm just giving you a tip, but you are supposed to go and get more information around whatever I'm giving you. Don't expect me to give you everything. Whatever I'm giving you, it is just a tip, but you are supposed to go out and make sure that you make or you construct material. Remember last time I talked about constructivism theory, whereby this learner-centered pedagogy is one of them, is under constructivism. Learners have to construct information. So that is why I want you to also to go and construct, because I've given you characteristics of learner-centered teaching. When I tell you motivating students by giving them appraisals such as good and what, you are supposed to write several paragraphs about this. When I tell you that you have to provide explicit skill instruction, you have to go to the library and get more information around this. Now, let us look at the characteristics. Characteristics of learner-centered pedagogy. Learner-centered pedagogy. Remember, I've told you that you have to directly engage students in messy work of learning, hard work of learning. How do you do this? You have to engage your students. You engage them as you learn. You teach them problem solving skills. Your students have to get these skills. They need to solve problems. For example, I'm using something very easy or something very simple. If you're teaching students a multiplication table, for example, multiplication, how to master multiplication table. You don't just have to give them tables and make them to memorize. For example, you make them sing that 3 times 3 is 9. No, show them a way in which, let them have games in which how they can solve various multiplication problems. Or if you're teaching division, you give them a task. For example, you can give your learners a task. For example, you give them 5 oranges and you ask them to divide 5 oranges among 7 people. 5 oranges, you have 5 oranges, and you ask them to divide among 7. Let them, that is a problem because the oranges are 5 and the learner or the children are 7. So ask them to solve that. Give them 5 oranges and ask them to solve it by dividing to 7 children. That is a problem. You don't solve it for them. Don't just tell them that if you have 5, then divide them. You have 5 oranges, divide them to 5 and leave out 2. No. Or you have 7 oranges and you have to divide to 5 children, then give them 1 and remain with the 2. No, don't solve that problem for them. You engage them, you give them a problem and ask them to solve the problem. So you teach them that skill. Let them have that skill of solving problem. And that is what CBC is all about. When you go out, you don't teach using those old teaching skills. No, you have to engage them. And here we have learner-centered approach. You engage your learners, give them problems, show them how to solve problems. How to solve problems. That is the first method. Now the second skill, we say that you provide explicit skill instruction. Here, you have to get students to think about thinking. Let them think. Let your students think. Do not think for them. If you're teaching them literature, give them a debate. Now, there is this book that students have been doing. It was Blossoms of Savannah. I think that book is being phased out with the current from 4. That is Blossoms of Savannah. Now, there was this character called Olekaelo and the 2 daughters. This is Rezian and Tayo. So if you have to teach this, you don't have to solve for them. You can, for example, engage them. You ask them if you were imagine that you are Tayo, and this is what, or imagine that you are Rezian and you're faced with this monster, Oloisidori in the name, Oloisidori. What would you do? So let them think. You engage them. Let your learners think. Let them solve problems. Do not solve for them. Do not think for them. So get your learners, get your students thinking. Another characteristic of learner-centered pedagogy, you allow your students or your learners to have control. For example, when you sit behind the class and you allow one of the students to stand before them and engage them in a certain topic. Now, in case we have some learners who are making noise, pretend that you are not getting that noise and let the student who is now standing before them, let that student exercise some power over others. Let that student ask the rest to keep quiet or to have order in that class so that that class can continue. So that is allowing students to have some control. Do not micromanage your learners. That is what we are saying. Avoid micromanaging your learners. Now, something else, another characteristic of learner-centered approach is encouraging collaboration. Remember what I said. You encourage collaboration. So let learners collaborate with one another or collaborate with you. This one can be done through group discussions, through group tasks, through group carrying out group assignments, and that one is that. Remember, at times we give group assignments. At times we give group assignments. Now, allow me talk about key principles to learner-centered teaching. So, learner-centered teaching does not just happen in a vacuum, but learner-centered teaching can take place or has some principles, and these are the principles that I want to give you. So, we have four main characteristics of student-centered learning model. I'm talking about main characteristics, main characteristics of a student-centered learning model. So that is voice. That is the first one. We have choice. So the students have to be heard. You don't ask them to keep quiet. In fact, if I pass around your class or a school that is pretending to be offering CBC, and I find out that there is total silence. The only voice that I can hear is the voice of a teacher or teachers teaching in various classrooms. Then that is not learner-centered approach. We have to hear the student's voice. The student's voice is key to learner-centered approach. In fact, at times there is noise in such classes. I will expect to hear some noise in student learner approaches. There is another characteristic that is choice. Let learners choose what to learn and how to learn. So when you go to class in learner-centered approach, you as an instructor, you as a teacher, you don't have to carry all the materials and all the information into class. No. When you go to class, students will assist you in making of the materials and choosing of how to learn. Let them participate. Let them have a choice. So the students' choice matter here. Let them also have control on the choice of how to learn and what to learn. Now, thirdly, this is another principle to learner-centered approach. This is another one. This one is competency-based progression. Competency-based progression. So that when you go to class, we don't expect all learners in a given class to be on the same page or at the same level. No. Allow students to be at different levels, and this one will depend on one, how speed can one learn, how fast can one learn, or the student's choice. So we have some learners who are quick learners, others are slow learners. So let every learner or let each and every individual learn at their own pace. Do not force them. Lastly, and not least, there is continuous monitoring of students' needs. You, as an instructor, you have to continuously monitor the students' need and provide them accordingly. Now, I want to talk about something else, and these are the dimensions of learner centered teaching. The dimensions of learner centered teaching. And these dimensions are going to be based on Blue Mark. Blue Mark thoroughly discusses five dimensions or areas of learner centered teaching. I'm referring to Blue Mark, who thoroughly discusses five dimensions or five areas of learner centered teaching. So if you don't want to say five dimensions, you can say five areas of learner centered teaching. And these ones are according to Blue Mark. According to Blue Mark, the first dimension is the function of content. The second dimension is the role of the instructor. The third dimension is the responsibility of learning. The fourth dimension, according to Blue Mark, is the purpose or the purposes and processes of assessment. And lastly, the last among the five dimensions of learner centered teaching, according to Blue Mark, is the balance of power. My dear learners, remember, you'll have to expound on this. In fact, in the takeaway assignment, you will be expounding on this. The moment you expound on this, I give you marks, and we are marking that out of 40. That is what I told you. Now, the five dimensions of learner centered teaching have been given as the function of content, the role of the instructor, the responsibility of learning, the purposes and processes of assessment, and lastly, the balance of power. Now, how do teachers teach through a student centered approach? Remember, this is what you are expected to do. If you're teaching in a high school, you know that these CBC learners are just about to cross over to high school. Some of you will be teaching at the university. Remember, these CBC learners, it's just a matter of 2, 3 years, they will be at the university level. So you'll be dealing with them. Then you will be expected to use this student centered approach in CBC. You are highly encouraged to use a student centered approach, not teacher centered approach. You don't go to class and pump knowledge into the learner. No, you use student or learner centered approach. Now, how are you expected to teach through a student centered approach? So a student centered approach in a classroom is supposed to be approached in this way. So the ultimate goal is to make the educational process more meaningful to students, not to teachers. The best way to do that is by framing lessons in terms of students' interest. You don't teach according to your interests as a teacher. No, you teach. You are expected to teach according to the interests of the students, according to the interests of the learners. So, what are you supposed to do, or how are you supposed to do this? You are supposed to do this by encouraging your learners, encouraging your students to engage more in the material. Let them engage with the materials. So, you as an instructor, you are supposed to gather the materials that are necessary for learning, and you set them in class, and you allow your learners to interact with the materials. Some of the materials are supposed to be collected by your learners. They are supposed to be made by your learners and let them engage or interact with the materials. So that is how you are supposed to teach under this model. So what is the role of the teacher in this learner-centered teaching? That is the question you could be asking. You are likely to be asking, what will be the role of the teacher if the student is supposed to lead his own learning? If the student is supposed to make the materials, the student is supposed to discuss, is supposed to share, is supposed to discuss with another student, then what is the role of the teacher? You have to get this one right. Don't think that your role as a teacher is to sit in class and sleep in class as students do everything. No, you have to get your role very well. So, what is the role of the teacher in learner centered teaching? So, in the learner centered model, the teacher takes on the role of a facilitator. The teacher is a facilitator of learning. The teacher is going to act as a guide. And last time when I was teaching you, I remember having told you that a teacher will act as a signpost. A teacher will have a role of a coach. You know, when you are a coach and you are coaching a football team, you as a coach will not play. You will not go into the field and play and score. No, and defend. No. A coach, the work of a coach is to guide. A coach or a teacher is going to act as a conductor, a choir master or a choir conductor. A choir conductor will conduct the choir but not sing. There are the members who will sing. The members of the choir will sing, but the conductor will just lead the choir. The role of a teacher in a learner centered model is to act as a midwife, is to act as a gardener. Why? Why will a teacher act as a guide, as a coach, a conductor, midwife, or a gardener? Why? Because the learners or the students are doing the work of problem solving. Who is supposed to solve the problem? Learners. You are not supposed to solve for them. And that is why I have problem with the mathematics teachers who go to class and talk for 40 minutes. If you are a teacher of mathematics and you go to class and you talk for 40 minutes, you are not doing anything. You are a teacher of history, a teacher of language, English or Kiswahili. You go to class and you talk for 40 minutes. You are doing a disservice. In a learner-centered teaching, allow the learners to take control, to be masters of their own lesson, to be masters of their own learning. We expect them to talk. We expect them to solve problems. So the teacher is a guide. The teacher is a coach. The teacher is a conductor, a midwife, a gardener. So who is supposed to be solving problems? The learners. Allow learners to solve the problems. Students are reviewers. They are supposed to review their own lessons. Students or learners are supposed to be discussing. Let them discuss issues. Students are supposed to be creating information, generating knowledge. Traditional way of teaching is whereby the teacher will generate knowledge and impart the same knowledge in learners. This is very different from a learner-centered approach. The students are supposed to create their own knowledge in learner-centered approach. So initially, this may feel like the teacher's job. And that is why I've gone around, let me tell you, I've gone around listening to teachers during my research work. I've gone around, I've listened to teachers in very many classes. Those ones who are pretending they have been trained in CBC, and I can uh, pointedly or frankly report to you that no CBC is taking place in these classes because teachers are still imparting knowledge into learners. Teachers are still taking control of these classes. That is not CBC. The true CBC is supposed to be learner centered. Those lessons are supposed to be done by students. They're the ones who are supposed to solve problems, to review their lessons, to discuss, to create knowledge, but not the teachers. So teachers are just supposed to act, to act as posters, midwives, gardeners, conductors, and coaches. So that is the work of the teacher in learner-centered approach. So how will you know what is a key feature of an ideal learner-centered classroom? How will you know that this classroom, if you worked in a class today, what will guide you to know? What feature will guide you to know that this is a learner-centered classroom? So in student-centered classrooms, students are directly involved and invested in the discovery of their own knowledge. So students are supposed to discover knowledge. They are supposed to discover. You are not supposed to tell them. You are not supposed to give them knowledge. Knowledge is not supposed to be given to students by teachers. Students, teacher, you are not supposed to walk into a classroom and you sing knowledge and students clap for you that you really know. No. You are supposed to engage them, give them tasks, give them problems, and allow them to solve those problems. Let them discover knowledge. So, through collaboration and cooperation with others, students engage in experimental learning that is authentic, holistic, and challenging. So, that is the work of the student. And that is what will guide you. That is a feature that will guide you to be able to identify a class that is student or learner centered as opposed to teacher centered. Remember, I talked about domains of learner centered approach. And here I ask you, what are the domains of learner centered approach? What are the domains of learner-centered approach? So in this lesson, I'm going to give you 5 domains of learner-centered approach. And remember, when you people go out to carry out research and write thesis, you will be interacting with this CBC. So you will rather know these things before you go out there. So I'm going to give you 5 domains of learner-centered approach. One is creating positive relationship and learning climate. Creating positive relationships and learning climate. 2, adapting to class learning needs. 3, facilitating the learning process. 4, encouraging personal challenge and responsibility. And lastly, the 5th domain of learner-centered approach is providing for individual and social learning needs. So those ones are the five domains of learner-centered approach. So how can you implement learner-centered approach in a classroom? If you're a teacher, how can you implement learner-centered approach in a classroom? So there are 7 ways to build a learner-centered classroom. If you are a teacher and you want to build a learner-centered approach, this is how you can do it. One, begin with a clear standard-based mindset. When you go to class, let the student know the clear standard, but let them know the objectives. Let them know the objectives that you seek to achieve. So begin with a clear standard-based mindset. Let the learners know what you expect of them. What standards do you expect of them? At the end of that learning, what should happen? What changes do you expect in that learner? So make sure that you begin with a clear standard-based mindset. Two, make your assessment goal clear. Make your assessment goals clear. How will you assess these learners? Let the learners know how you are going to assess them. So make your assessment goals very clear so that as they start learning, as you start your lesson, you know how you are going to assess them. Remember, instead student or learner centered approach, you assess them as the lesson uh, grows. As you advance in your lesson, as you are carrying out your lesson, you assess them as a lesson goes on. Now, thirdly, you are supposed to develop a community, not a classroom of the learners. So that classroom should be actually be a community, not a classroom. Make them feel that they are a community. Let them learn as a community. So your classroom should be a community of learners, not a classroom of learners. Fourthly, provide opportunities for all learners. Remember, in that classroom, you are not teaching them as a class, you are teaching them as individuals. So, provide opportunities for each and every learner to learn. Something else is that infuse a growth mindset into your instruction. Let your learners grow. Lastly, give your students agency over their learners. So I want you to give your students agency over their learning, and that one you will build them. So that is the 7 ways to build a learner-centered classroom. If you want to have a learner-centered classroom, make sure that you have all those ones that I've given you. Now, what are the strategies and tools used for learner-centered instruction? So, what are the strategies if you want to have a learner centered approach or learner centered instruction? What strategies are you going to use? So, the strategies and tools used for learner centered instruction are reported in 6 major categories. They are reported in 6 major categories. 6 major categories. One, getting to know individual students. Make sure that you know individual students with their strengths and weaknesses. Two, build a positive and supportive culture. Make sure that students have a very good supportive culture. Let them support one another, or you can support them. You as an instructor. So another one, provide personalized learning experiences. Personalized learning experiences. Let Don't just understand them as groups or as a whole, but make sure that you provide personalized learning experiences. Provide authentic learning experiences. That's another one. Provide authentic learning experiences. And lastly, facilitate collaboration between and among your learners. Facilitate collaboration between and among your learners. And if you do that, then you will have a You will have what are the roles of student-centered learning. Student-centered learning is important. Student-centered learning is important as it focuses on individual student needs, their unique learning styles, and engages them in the learning processes. The focus on student needs, they will also learn at their own pace and make pedagogical decisions that suit them best. How should a learning centered classroom look like? How, if I walk in a certain class, how will I know that this is a learner centered classroom? Learner centered classrooms or student centered classrooms are big on collaborations, which means they don't usually have rows or desks facing each other or facing the lecturer or facing the lecturer. You can have tables and have your learners face one another, or you can have desks facing one another so that students can face one another for each discussions. Instead, desks and tables are arranged so that it is easy for students to collaborate on projects or on analyzing reading rather than listening to lecturers. Students in learner-centered classroom are not supposed to listen to their teachers. They are supposed to collaborate with one another on projects. So teachers are not the owners of information, but information is created or constructed by learners. So what is the major concept? What is the major concept of a learner-centered curriculum? Learner-centered curriculum design focuses on the individual who will be learning. You focus on that individual who will be learning. The content and the interface are created around what the students will learn. We don't create, you as an instructor, you don't create materials and then deliver them to the learner. No, you don't make your lesson. You don't look for materials and work in a class and deliver to the learner. No, we put the students first and create the materials around the experiences of the learner. So if you want to have a learner centered, you want to have a learner centered lesson, you want to work in a class and carry out a CBC class, create the materials or the lesson around the experiences of the learner. But don't just create information and materials and walk into class and pump the same to the learner. No, that will not be a learner-centered curriculum. But a learner-centered curriculum is the one that teachers will work in a class and create materials and information around the learners. So the domains of learning, and these ones you must have, if you are teachers, and I believe that all of you are teachers here, these ones you interacted them in your undergraduate studies. We have three domains of learning. That is cognitive domain or cognitive knowledge, and this is mental skills. The second one is affective domain, and this is can be referred to as affective attitude. And this one deals with emotions, a subject such as CRE. We have psychomotor domain or psychomotor skills. This is physical skills, and these ones students acquire them in lessons such as physical education, PE. And this one I believe that most of you don't take your students for PE. These ones can also be acquired in lessons such as computer learning. Those students who are doing computer studies, those ones who do drawing and design, those ones who do music, music and dance. We have psychomotor skills there. So, what are the 10 elements of student centered learning? 10 elements of student centered learning. We have student, teacher as core learners. So, students and teachers are core learners. Students and teachers are core learners. So, when you go to class, you as a teacher always endeavor to learn with your students, not just students who are learning, but you as a teacher, you are also supposed to learn because there are things that you don't know. You don't know. You are not all knowing. You are not God. You are not an angel. Only God knows everything. But you, being a human being, you don't know everything. So you have to learn with your learners. That is one of the elements, or the first element of student centered learning. The second element is student student interaction. The third one is learner autonomy. Let the learners have the autonomy of creating their information. Another one is focus on meaning. Another one is curricular integration. Another one is diversity. The ninth one is thinking skills. And the last one is alternative assessment or learning climate and motivation. What are the main weaknesses of student centered approach? These are the disadvantages of student centered approach. One, this approach to learning, we are saying that this approach to learning is not the best, is not structured as the old one or the traditional method of learning. So that you can go to class without all that structure because there is you can even change whatever you want to teach in class. For example, if you are going to class and you want to teach about